Hello, you're looking at a model I made in SketchUp Make 2016. Not a very impressive model, but good enough for me to do my little review of BlendUp, which is an extension for SketchUp 2014 onwards, which allows you to export in blend format. Blender being another 3D modeler, much more complex than SketchUp, much more difficult to learn, but Blender has the advantage that you can do renders, you can do nice lighting setups, and you can do renders for a realistic image, something that SketchUp can't do. There are many other ways of getting renders from SketchUp. I've tried several, and I don't think anything really compares with what I'm about to show you, especially if you are familiar with Blender, which is a wonderful free program just like SketchUp Make. So what we are seeing here is obviously a model with some textures or materials applied to it, and that includes the glass transparent material in the windows. We can see that we have the shadows turned on. We get them here. Shadows are something that should be preserved by the BlendUp extension. You can get the BlendUp extension yourself easily by searching for BlendUp as a single word in Google or another search engine. BlendUp is available as a free version, BlendUp LT, and as a paid for version currently $35 for the beta version, and it will be $70 when the final version comes out. The limitation of the LT version is not a time limitation, it's a limitation to the number of faces, no more than 1000 faces. This model, for example, we can see in the window menu, model info, statistics. If you turn on show nested components, that will include the nested components in the face count. Here you can see we have 129 faces total, so this will be compatible with the LT free version of BlendUp. You can see that BlendUp LT is installed because you can see it adds a line to the file menu of SketchUp. And while we're here, I will mention that one of the options called Mark Edges is on by default. I've turned it off because if you leave it on, then the marking of the edges in the Blender model, it's disconcerting to me because I'm not familiar with it, don't really know what it means and so on. So I turned it off. And the other thing to notice here is that we are exporting as quads and n-gons. This is a big feature of BlendUp, I guess. The normal way of exporting from SketchUp to Blender previously was to use the Collada or DAE format, and I've tried that, and it generates a model made of triangles, which multiplies the number of edges by a factor of several and makes the model pretty messy in my opinion. Also, it doesn't seem to preserve the materials in the Blender model, or not in an easy way that this extension is capable of doing. So I'm about to export this model to Blender. I already mentioned the shadows, which of course we can adjust according to the time of day, time of year. We can see the shadows are on the right and are quite long. The sun is presumably quite low in the sky. Notice the view that we have here, because that view, that perspective should be preserved also in Blender. Blender will create a camera which has this view. And let me point out also that Lisan is a component, in fact, in SketchUp, and the rest of the model includes this box here, which ultimately will contain a lamp in Blender. I made that into a group just to see how groups are handled in the extension. So I'm going to go ahead with the export now, and that won't be via the export menu, then it'll be via BlendUp LT. Export. You can see we are creating a blend file, a Blender file in other words. And as we create that blend file, we can see that Blender automatically opens and displays the exported file. So we're in solid view here in Blender. We can see we do have the same view, the same perspective that we had back in SketchUp, so that has been successful. The model looks neat enough, but in this solid view we have a lot of trouble seeing, for example, the edges of the doors. I really think ambient occlusion should be turned on in order to show those edges better. You can do that with the N panel. Press N on the keyboard, and in the shading section we can turn on ambient occlusion, which gives us something resembling shadows. Certainly makes it easier to see these edges. I think the shadows are a little too strong. I say shadows, not really based on lighting, it's based on how close the surfaces are and the angles between the surfaces, but it is helpful to turn that on. The strength right now is 1. I think it gives shadows that are too strong and rather dirty looking. I prefer to set this to 0.7. In my opinion, that should be on probably all the time in Blender by default. Speaking of default, your default user interface won't be used when you use the extension, because Blender opens automatically. It's using the user interface that is part of the model. You can see we have some settings here that may be a little odd, such as these resolution settings that the extension has generated for us, or the number of samples here, 100 samples for the render and 100 samples for the preview. I guess normally the render would have many more samples than that. Normally my Blender opens up with this setting here to use the graphics processor that I have, but because it hasn't used my user interface, I've got the central processing unit instead, so I'm going to switch that to the graphics processor so the rendering goes faster later on. If you did want to use your own user interface and not this one, if this one isn't bad, but if you wanted to use your own, I think the trick would be to close Blender after the export, reopen Blender, and then use File Open to open the blend model. And as you do that, you can turn off the option of using the user interface that is recorded within the blend file, and that will mean you will be using your own user interface rather than importing one. So this is the solid view. We notice a problem with the sun. The sun exists like it did in SketchUp, but it's pointing, the sun's rays are pointing vertically downwards. We can see them here, and you can get the confirmation of that here if I do rendered view. This is Blender version 2.76b, and you need version 2.74 or later to use with the BlendUp extension. Of course, Blender is a free program. Here you can see the proof that the sunlight is coming vertically down, because you can see this box just cast a shadow here vertically beneath it. That shouldn't really have happened because the shadows were meant to be preserved. They should be on the right here. We can fix that fairly easily by going back to material view. We didn't see material view, did we yet? But it looks pretty nice. Obviously the materials have come through in a very straightforward way, and we see the sun here with its rays vertically downwards, but just by pressing R we can rotate the sun and angle that something like we had in SketchUp. So now we can see in rendered view that we have the shadow to the right of the house, just as it was in SketchUp. We're going to adjust the sun so that we get more like a moonlight effect, so that we have an excuse to add other lights. I will add a light here, like a yellowish light inside this box, and I will add a red light inside the house, and then I will stop. So we've got the shadow of the building in the right place now. Because I want this to be giving us a moonlight effect, I'm going to make the sun have less strength. We can select the sun, even in this view we can select the sun by using the outliner. There's the sun right there. I'm clicking on it. In fact, it's already selected. We can see that. We have already the option here of choosing the object data properties of the sun, and that includes the white light from the sun, and it includes the strength of the sun being 5 units. So I'm going to make this into moonlight by making it blue. I'm going to change the strength of the sunlight to say 1, and that's a dim sunlight effect. You might be surprised how much light there is here and how little contrast there is between the shadow and the non-shadow. That's because even though we only have one proper lamp in this Blender model, we also have a setting in the world panel which gives a kind of diffuse light. It's called background. It has a strength of 1, and if I turn that off, if I turn that to 0, in other words, you'll see that now we have the so-called sun that I'm using as a moon, and we don't have that diffuse light anymore. That looks rather harsh though, so I'll put in some diffuse light, 0.2, and this is a good enough moonlight effect for me to think about adding now the 2 other lights that I'm going to use. I'll do that in material view probably. I'm going to do Shift A to add my a lamp. It'll be a point lamp. It's been added here. I'm going to position that inside this box. Best way to position something is to do that in orthogonal view rather than perspective view. I'm pressing 5 then on the number pad, and you just need to position in 2 different views, ideally at a 90-degree angle to one another. So I'm going to front view, pressing 1 on the number pad in order to move this lamp. I'm pulling the white circle into the box. Still not in the right location though, as you'll see if I move into another view at 90 degrees. I'm in I press 3 on the number pad, so I'm in side view now, and using the green arrow I've moved the lamp inside the box now. Might as well go back to perspective view. It's a more natural view, more distorted as well you might say, but I'll be in perspective view now then. Let's make this lamp already. Switching to the object data properties, we have white light here, strength 100. I'll give this a warm yellow color and switch to the render view so we can see what's going on. We can see we have some light already, but I don't think we have enough, so I'll switch this to say 500 instead. That's about the effect that I wanted here. We can see a fair amount of noise, which won't disappear completely because this is only a preview render with 100 samples. We're at 50 samples already. Of course, the trick to reducing this noise that is characteristic of the Cycles render engine is to have many more samples. So the final render would normally be at least 500 samples, for example. I'm going to put another lamp in here then, a red lamp inside the house. That's easier to do in a different view, say material view. I have my lamp here still selected. I'm going to duplicate that by pressing Shift D, and I'll move the lamp in the green direction by also pressing Y for the green direction. Seems to me that's roughly the center of the building. Move it maybe a bit in the red direction also. I haven't done this, as I just said you should do, in orthogonal view. But this is roughly the center of the building. It doesn't have to be exact like it did for the other one. And we said we'd make this red, and it needs to be pretty bright also. Try 2000 for that. I don't know what you're expecting to see now when I switch to the rendered view. This is what we're getting, and we can see that the material is transparent. Here we can see that we have the red light coming through the windows here and here, which is all kind of attractive, I think. And as we look around, we notice, by the way, that Lisanne doesn't always face the camera like she would in SketchUp. That's a small difference, not very significant. If I switch to wireframe view, you can see that the model is very clean. The export process added a couple new lines like here and here and here, and also here and here. These are not mistakes in any way. They have to be added really in the export process because of a restriction in Blender which says that n-gons, such as this rectangle, which is the wall of the building, n-gons in Blender cannot have holes in them, and the windows would be holes. So a rectangle here with holes in it wouldn't be possible unless we split that rectangle into two shapes, as these three lines split that rectangle into two shapes, neither of which has a hole in really. I'm not quite sure why these two lines are here, but there aren't many of them. If you delete them, I think it messes up the model, so I won't do that. Notice that this is one object in Blender. It includes everything really except for the light. The lights, the camera, and also Lisanne is not selected right now because Lisanne is a component, so that becomes a separate object in Blender. And I made this into a group in SketchUp, and that's a separate object too. So according to what you want the objects to be in Blender, you can control that by what is made into groups and components in SketchUp and what isn't. But I don't really think you should be doing a lot of modeling work in Blender. The idea of using BlendUp would be that you basically make the model in SketchUp, export it into Blender, and then only use Blender to set up the lighting and do the final render here. So we've noticed a few differences, a few tiny problems with the extension. Basically it worked very well, and we've noted that Lisanne doesn't face the camera, that we had a couple of extra lines in the model that weren't in the SketchUp model. We noticed a problem with the shadows of the sun and the necessity of reorienting the sun, but it's looking pretty good. I'm almost ready to stop, and what else to say? Let's remind ourselves that when we do the final render in Blender, it will be from the camera's point of view. We can see through the camera by pressing 0 on the number pad, so that'll be this view right here. Doesn't look too bad. I'll go ahead with the final render in Blender to see what we get, and as it does the final render, then we'll be getting this fairly high resolution. We'll only be getting 100 samples, so we should expect a fair amount of noise unless we increase that number. I notice that the tile size as we do the render, opening the performance section here, the tile size is 32 pixels by 32 pixels for each tile, which I think is small if you have a graphics processor. I tried changing this, I'll do it now, into 256. This should be a power of 2. 256 is okay then. And these numbers I think should be the same. 256 and 256 are square tiles. Larger tiles, which according to my experiments, that reduces the render time for me by a factor of about 3. So the render should go fairly fast now. When I click the render button, And let's see, using the graphics processor then, we get to this effect with our 100 samples. I do recommend then that you try BlendUp, perhaps the free version first of all, BlendUp LT. Just look for BlendUp as a single word, and in your search engine you'll find the website easily. Don't forget the free version is limited to models with less than 1,000 faces, but the paid for version is only $35 now for the beta version. The final version will cost $70, I believe. That's the final render. Some visual noise because there's only 100 samples, but I like the effect, the kind of effect you can't get at all in SketchUp itself, and I think this is a good solution for getting a rendered effect with